Captain Elias Corps had seen countless battles. He had fought in wars across the galaxy, outsmarted enemy fleets, and led his troops to victory against impossible odds. But nothing could have prepared him for the Zerothians. The Zerothians were the stuff of nightmares. Massive, armored creatures with scales that glittered like metal, they were known for their cruelty and their fearsome armies. Their empire spanned hundreds of planets, and they had been at war with humanity for decades. No one had ever made a dent in their power, until now. Elias and his team had been part of a joint human rebellion force, made up of colonies scattered throughout the galaxy. Their mission was simple: sabotage a Zorothian supply line on a remote planet. It was meant to be a quick strike, nothing too dangerous. But everything had gone wrong. The moment they landed on the planet, a Zorothian ambush had surrounded them. Their ships were shot down before they could even launch their counterattack. The rest of the team fought bravely, but one by one, they fell to the overwhelming force of the Zorothian soldiers. Elias himself was captured after a fierce battle, outnumbered and outgunned. Now, he found himself aboard a Zorothian warship, his wrists bound by thick chains. Staring at a creature that could end him in an instant, the Queen Archie stood tall, her body wrapped in dark, gleaming armor, her reptilian eyes fixed on him with an intensity that could burn a hole in his soul. Elias was a trained soldier, a man who had faced danger more times than he cared to count. But even he couldn't help the shiver that ran down his spine. Zira's voice, deep and commanding, echoed through the cold metal chamber. "Human," she said, her tone like ice. "You have trespassed on my planet, killed my soldiers, and disrupted my empire's plans. You should be dead by now." Elias glared at her, refusing to show weakness. "I've done nothing that your empire hasn't done to us. You're the invaders, not us." Zira chuckled darkly, stepping closer. "Humans always so self-righteous. You think you're the victims in this war, but you're the ones who started it. My people were content. It was you who sought to challenge us." Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, his mind working quickly. This was the leader of the Zorothian Empire, the most feared ruler in the galaxy. He had heard rumors of her cruelty, of how she wiped out entire colonies without mercy. Yet as she stood before him, there was something different about her. Something human. "Why did you spare me?" he asked, his voice steady. Zira tilted her head, as if considering his question. "I have my reasons," she said cryptically. "But your fate is not in my hands alone. My council will decide whether you live or die." Elias narrowed his eyes. He had no illusions about his situation. He was in enemy territory, and there was little chance of escape. But he had been in worse situations before. There was always a way out. But just as he was about to formulate a plan, Zira spoke again. This time, her voice was quieter, almost curious. "You want peace, human?" she asked. Elias frowned. "What do you mean by that?" She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing, and in an almost playful tone, she said, "Then marry me." Elias blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "What?" Zira's expression remained calm. "If you want peace between our species, then marry me. Marry me, and I will end this war. I will bring peace to the galaxy." Elias could hardly believe what he was hearing. The mighty Zorothian queen, known for her ruthless campaigns and savage tactics, was asking him to marry her. A human? It didn't make sense. There had to be something more to this. "Why would I marry you?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "You want peace? Then why not just make a treaty like any other leader would?" Zira stepped back, her expression cold but thoughtful. "Do you think I can simply convince my people to stop the war with a treaty? My people will never trust you, human. But if we unite, if we form an alliance, then we can end this war." Elias scoffed. "You want me to marry you as some political gesture?" "Not just that," she replied, her voice steady. "The Zorothian Empire respects strength and power. To marry me would signal to my people that you are worthy of respect. You would become more than just a human in their eyes. You would become my equal." Elias shook his head. "This sounds insane." You think so? Zyra asked. Perhaps, but you don't know the Zorathians as I do. Treaty would be meaningless. A marriage. That would hold power. It would be a message to my empire that peace with humanity is not just a political necessity, but a personal bond. Elias remained silent, considering her words. He had heard the rumors, the legends of the Zorathian queen's power. If she was serious, this could be his only chance to end the war. But the idea of marrying this alien ruler, this cold, calculating creature, was hard to stomach, and yet there was something in her eyes, something that made Elias question whether she was truly as heartless as she seemed. He had fought alongside humans who wore the same cold, distant masks, only to reveal a different side when the situation called. For could there be more to Zyra than met the eye? I'm not sure I can trust you, he said cautiously. This could be a trick. You could be using me to manipulate your people. Zyra's eyes softened for a brief moment, and Elias saw a flicker of something genuine concern. Fear was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it made him pause. She wasn't as unreadable as he had thought. I don't expect you to trust me, she said quietly, but I'm asking you to take a leap of faith. For the sake of both our people. Elias exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of her words. I had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this was the greatest challenge he had ever faced. Marrying the Zorathian queen to bring peace to the galaxy? It sounded like madness. But was it any crazier than the war they were in? Than the lives that had already been lost? He stared at her, his mind racing. He had never been one for politics, but he was a soldier. And a soldier knew when to fight, and when to make difficult decisions. I'll need time, he said finally, his voice firm. Zyra gave a slight nod. You will have time. Think it over. You will be my guest until then. As she turned to leave, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a political game. There was something more. Play here. Something far deeper than he had ever imagined. Captain Elias Kaur sat on the cold floor of his cell, the chains around his wrists rattling as he shifted. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Zyra's words echoed in his head. If you want peace, human, then marry me. Marry the Zorathian queen. He couldn't shake the image of her towering over him, the cool calculation in her eyes. She was not the type to make empty promises, especially not one as outrageous as this. But peace was a rare thing, especially in a galaxy as torn apart by war as this one. Could he actually do it? Could he marry the most feared ruler in the galaxy? To stop the bloodshed? Elias had fought in countless battles, faced death more times than he could count, but nothing had ever felt as heavy as this decision. He needed time to think. And he needed information for the next few days. Elias was left alone in the cell, the silence broken only by the occasional clang of footsteps outside. It gave him time to reflect, but more importantly, it gave him the opportunity to plan. Couldn't afford to make a mistake now. He thought back to the brief conversation he'd had with Zyra. She'd sounded sincere, even when she spoke of peace.
Oh.
But how could he trust her? Was this really her plan, or was she using him as a pawn in some greater game? No. Elias wasn't foolish enough to believe she was entirely on his side. The Zorathians had always been the enemy. Even if Zyra genuinely wanted peace, her people might never accept it. There had to be a deeper motive. He had to learn more. He had to understand her true intentions. The next day, Zyra visited him again. Time, she was alone. No guards at her side. She stood in the doorway, her tall, imposing figure silhouetted by the light behind her. I've given you time to think, she said, her voice calm but with a hint of impatience. What is your decision, human? Elias looked up at her, his eyes narrowing. I haven't made a decision yet. I'm still trying to understand why you'd offer this. Marrying me, ... It doesn't make sense. Zyra tilted her head, studying him. I've told you the truth. My people would never accept peace through diplomacy alone. But if we are united, they will listen. They will respect the bond between us. You think a marriage will change that? Elias asked. You're their queen, they follow you. Why does it have to be me? Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. I could rule with an iron fist, as many before me have done. That would only bring more bloodshed. I'm tired of the fighting, Elias. I'm tired of the death. You may be human, but you have something the Zorthians respect: strength, conviction. If you marry me, you show my people that you're worthy of their respect, and in turn, they will follow. Elias didn't know if he believed her. She spoke with such authority, such confidence. It was hard to ignore the weight of her words, but was it enough to trust her? Is this peace really what it seemed, or was it another ploy to manipulate him? How can I trust you? Elias asked. You could be playing me, using me as a tool to gain power over humanity. I understand your skepticism, Zira replied, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. But I am not like the others. I do not want war. My people are tired of it. They want an end to the violence just as you do. Elias studied her carefully. He had seen enough leaders, both good and bad, to recognize when someone was telling the truth. Zira's words were harsh, but they weren't lies. There was something real in her eyes, a weariness, a longing for an end to the endless battles. But was that enough? Could he risk everything on the word of an alien queen? What happens if I say no? Elias asked. What happens if I refuse? Zira's eyes hardened again, but there was no anger in them, just a deep, quiet resolve. Then this war will continue. The Zorthians will never stop until they've crushed your people. The only way to stop it is to unite. Elias took a deep breath. He didn't want to make this decision. He didn't want to marry the enemy. But the alternative was the death of countless innocents. He had seen enough bloodshed, enough destruction. Could he really turn away from the chance for peace? Before he could respond, a loud noise from outside the door interrupted them. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder. A few moments later, a Zorothian guard entered the room, his expression grim. Queen Zira, the guard said, bowing slightly. There's a matter you need to attend to. The council demands your presence immediately. Zira turned to Elias, her eyes momentarily filled with frustration. Duty calls, she said. ... But think carefully about what I've said. Peace is within your grasp. With that, she turned and walked out of the room, the door closing behind her with a loud clang. Elias stood there for a moment, alone again. He wasn't any closer to a decision. In fact, he felt even more confused than before. There was something about Zira that made him want to believe her. But how could he trust her, truly trust her, when everything he had been taught about the Zorathians said they were enemies? A few hours later, Elias was summoned to meet with her again. This time, he was led to a large, lavish chamber deep inside the ship. The walls were adorned with intricate alien designs, and the air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers from the Zorothian homeworld. At the center of the room, Zira waited, seated on a large, ornate throne. Sit, human, she commanded as Elias entered. We have much to discuss. Elias sat cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. This was a far cry from the cold, sterile holding cell he had been kept in. He knew this was a place of power, a place where decisions were made. I've spoken with my council, Zira said, her voice measured. They are divided on your proposal. Some see your offer as a chance for peace. Others see it as a betrayal of everything the Zorthian Empire stands for. And what do you think? Elias asked. I think we have a rare opportunity, Zira replied, but it will not be easy. There are factions within my empire that will fight against this peace no matter what. So what's the next step? Elias asked. You will remain here for now. We need to prepare. A decision must be made soon, one way or another. Elias nodded. He didn't like the uncertainty, but there was little choice. He had no way of contacting his people, and he was at the mercy of Zira and her empire. The fate of humanity and the galaxy hung in the balance. Over the next few days, Elias spent most of his time in his quarters, thinking, weighing his options. The more he learned about the Zorothians, the more he realized how deep their hatred for humanity ran. But there were cracks in the walls. Zira herself was a product of that hatred, but she wasn't the same as the others. She wanted peace, or at least he hoped she did. The question remained, could he trust her? Could he marry her, and truly bring peace to the galaxy? He didn't know the answer yet, but he was running out of time. Captain Elias Kor sat by the window of his quarters, staring out into the endless black void of space. The stars outside flickered like distant diamonds, cold and unreachable. He had spent days locked away in this room, his mind tangled in a mess of thoughts. The decision he had to make weighed heavily on him. Marry the Zerothian queen to end the war, refuse and watch countless more lives be lost. He had seen the destruction caused by the war between humanity and the Zerothians. Entire colonies had been wiped out, their people slaughtered without mercy. Elias had lost friends, comrades, to the Zerothian forces, and the pain of that loss still haunted him. How could he trust the same empire that had caused so much suffering? But then there was Zyra. The Zerothian queen wasn't like the rest. At least, that's what she kept telling him. She was different. She wanted peace. She claimed she was tired of the endless bloodshed, and Elias couldn't deny the sincerity. He saw in her eyes. The offer she had made to him was something he couldn't ignore. If he married her, it could be the key to stopping the war. It could be the peace his people had been fighting for. Yet something about the idea felt wrong. How could he marry someone who had been his enemy for so long? Could he truly trust her? Was this peace real, or was it another clever trap? His thoughts were interrupted when the door to his quarters slid open. A Zerothian guard stepped inside, his face impassive. "Captain Kor," the guard said in a deep, gravelly voice, "Queen Zyra has requested your presence in the council chambers." Elias stood slowly, his muscles stiff from sitting for too long. He nodded, not bothering to speak, and followed the guard down the winding halls of the Zerothian warship. The ship was massive, its corridors lit by dim blue lights that seemed to pulse like the heartbeat of some ancient creature. The walls were lined with intricate alien symbols glowing faintly in the dark. It was a world unlike anything Elias had ever seen, a world that had been built to conquer, to dominate. He had once believed that the Zerothians were nothing but monsters, mindless in their hunger for war, but Zyra had shown him that there was more to them than he had imagined. Or at least, more to her. When they reached the council chambers, Elias was led inside. The room was vast, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch forever. A large table sat in the center, surrounded by Zerothian leaders, warriors, generals, and diplomats. At the head of the table, Zyra sat, her armor gleaming in the soft light. Her eyes met Elias's as he entered, and for the briefest moment he saw something in them that almost looked like hope. "Elias," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Please, come in. We have much to discuss." Elias walked into the room, his steps cautious. The tension in the air was thick. The council members didn't look pleased to see him. They glared at him with suspicion, as if they couldn't fathom why their queen would even consider making an alliance with a human. "I trust you've made your decision," Zyra said, gesturing to the seat next to her. "Sit. We have a lot of work ahead of us." Elias hesitated for a moment, then sat down. His gaze swept across the table, meeting the eyes of each council member. They didn't look like they were ready to accept a peace treaty. There was a hardness in their expressions, a distrust that ran deep. "I've been thinking," Elias began, his voice steady but loud enough to command attention. "I've been thinking a lot about your offer, Zyra. I need to know more. I need to understand how we get from here, where we are now, to actual peace." Zyra nodded, her face unreadable.
"That is a fair question," she said.
"And I will tell you everything. But understand this. This isn't just about us. This is about our people. We need to find a way to make this work." The council members shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with her words. One of them, a large, imposing figure with a deep scar across his face, stood up. "Queen Zyra," he said, his voice like thunder. "You want peace with the humans? You have any idea what that would mean? Our empire was built on war, on strength. We do not bow to outsiders, especially not to a race that has caused so much damage." Zyra's expression didn't change, but her eyes flashed with a hint of anger. "I understand your concerns, General Vornok. But this war has already cost us too much. We have lost millions of soldiers. Our resources are dwindling. The humans, though weaker in number, are proving to be resilient adversaries. Continuing this war is no longer in our best interest." General Vornok clenched his fists. "And yet you suggest an alliance with them? A human?" Zira stood up, her voice cold but firm. Suggest an alliance with the one who has the strength to end this war. Elias Kor is a soldier. He understands the cost of battle. And he has the courage to make hard choices. The room fell silent. Elias could feel the weight of their stares, their judgment. They didn't believe in peace. They believed in power. It was clear that if they didn't find a way to unite, this council would tear itself apart. I won't marry him, Vornok continued, glaring at Elias. Not if it means our empire bending to the will of the humans. Elias looked at Zyra, who was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but filled with authority. You're right, General, she said. The Zorathian Empire was built on strength, but strength isn't just about how many battles you win. It's about knowing when to stop fighting. Elias looked back at the council. And that's why I'm here. I'm not here because I want to marry Zira. I'm here because I want peace. We've fought long enough. We've lost enough. I can't sit by and watch more lives be lost because of stubborn pride. Vornok's eyes narrowed. You don't belong here, human. You're out of your depth. Elias stood, his voice rising. You don't know me, and you don't know. What I'm capable of, the only thing I've ever known, is war. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to end it. Even if it means doing something I never thought I could, trusting a Zorthian. There was a long pause as the council absorbed his words. Finally, Zyra spoke again, her voice softer now, but with an edge of finality. We've made our choice. It's not just about me. It's about all of us. Zorthians, humans, the entire galaxy. We can end this war. But only if we work together. The room was still heavy with uncertainty. But Elias could feel the shift in the air, the tiny crack. In the armor of the Zorathian Council, peace wasn't going to come easily, but it wasn't impossible either. I'll marry her, Elias said, his voice steady. If it means peace, then I'll do it. God. But know this, I'm not doing this for the Zorathian Empire. I'm doing this for humanity. Yes. And if I have to fight again to keep that peace, I will. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions conflicted. Vornok still looked angry, but even he couldn't deny the truth of Ilias's words. The war needed to end. They needed peace. Zira nodded, standing tall once more. Then it settled. Elias looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. Marrying her still felt like a dream, a fantasy, but it was real. It was happening. The war was coming to an end. One way or another, the days following Elise's decision passed in a blur. The moment he had spoken those words in the council room, everything had changed. Marrying Queen Zyra wasn't just about peace anymore. It was about survival. The tension was palpable. In every corner of the Zorothian warship, and Elias could feel it in the way the soldiers looked at him now, though he was no longer just a prisoner, but something else entirely, an ally, a traitor, or perhaps both. Elias had heard rumors. About the ceremony, the union between him and Zyra would be a grand event. One that would mark the beginning of a new era for both the Zorathians and humanity. But as the days went on, Elias couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at him. Could he really go through with this? Could he marry the very enemy he had fought against for so long? Zyra had been distant since the council meeting. She spoke with him only when necessary, and even then, there was a sense of formality that had never been there before. She had given him space to prepare, to think. But Elias wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Was she feeling the same uncertainty? Or was she already certain of their future together? The wedding would take place on the Zorathian homeworld, a planet that Elias had never visited. It was a place of incredible beauty, but also danger. The Zorothians had a long and bloody history, and the people who lived there were fierce and proud. They had seen thousands of years of war and conquest, and Elias couldn't help but wonder how they would react to a human marrying their queen. A few days before the ceremony, Elias was summoned to the royal chambers. When he entered, he found Zyra sitting at a large table, her posture straight and regal. She wore her armor, as usual. But there was a weariness in her eyes that wasn't there before. Elias, ill. She said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. I know this isn't easy for you. I know this isn't what you expected when you came here. He nodded, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, he had never expected anything like this. A few weeks ago, he had been a soldier fighting to defend humanity. Now, he was preparing to marry the very alien race that had brought humanity to the brink of extinction. I don't want you to feel like this is something you have to do, she continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. No, what you've lost. I know what it means to fight for your people, but this is something bigger than us. This is about all the lives we can save by ending this war. Elias looked at her, his heart heavy. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that this was the right choice. But could he really trust her? Could he trust the Zorathians? They had fought tooth and nail to destroy humanity, and now he was supposed to unite with them? I've been thinking about this, Elias said, his voice steady. I know what we're doing is for peace, but that doesn't make it easier. I still don't know if I can go through with this. I'm not just marrying you, Zyra. I'm marrying your people, tying myself to everything they've done. Zyra stood up and walked over to him, her expression softer than it had ever been. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. I understand, she said quietly. I've spent my entire life fighting for my people. I know what it's like to carry the weight of history. But I also know that sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good. You are the key to ending this war, Elias. You are the one who can help my people see that there is more to life than war. And I promise you, I won't let anyone harm you. I won't let anyone take this peace away from us. Elias looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity there. He had never expected this from her. Zyra wasn't like the other Zerothians. She wasn't driven by blind hatred or a lust for power. She truly wanted peace. But could peace really come from this union? Could the galaxy be saved by a single act of love between enemies? I want to believe you, Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. I really do. I'm not sure if I can trust anyone anymore. Zyra's gaze softened and she took a deep breath. Trust takes time, Elias. I won't ask you to trust me right away, but I'll prove myself to you in every way I can. We'll build this together. For your people, for mine. Elias didn't say anything for a long moment. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one pulling him in a different direction. He wanted peace. He wanted to end the war. But at what cost? He looked up at Zyra, his eyes meeting hers. If we do this, if we go through with the marriage, what happens then? What comes next? Zyra smiled, a small, bittersweet smile. We will build a new future together. It won't be easy. But nothing worth having ever is. The war will end, and my people will be united. Your people will have a voice in our empire. We will begin the slow work of rebuilding what has been broken. Elias nodded slowly. There were no guarantees in life, no promises that peace would last forever. But he couldn't keep fighting. He had seen enough death, enough destruction. Maybe, just maybe, this was their chance to start over, to heal. I'm willing to try, Elias said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. I'll do whatever it takes. Zyra's expression softened, and she placed her hand on his again, this time holding it firmly. Then we are not just marrying each other, Elias. We are marrying our future. The days leading up to the ceremony were a blur of preparation. Elias was introduced to the customs and rituals of the Zorothian people, each one more alien than the last. He had expected this, of course, but nothing could have prepared him for the grandeur of the wedding itself. The Zorothian homeworld. This was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a planet of breathtaking beauty, a place where nature and technology blended seamlessly. The cities rose high into the sky, their spires twisting and spiraling like the ancient trees that grew in the forests below. There was a feeling of timelessness here, as though the planet had seen countless ages of war and peace, would continue to endure long after they were gone. The wedding was held in a grand hall, carved from the heart of a mountain. The walls were lined with shining crystals that illuminated the room with a soft, ethereal light. Zorothian soldiers stood at attention, their spears raised high in silent tribute. At the front of the hall, a massive throne sat waiting for Zyra. And Elias. Elias stood at the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. He was dressed in ceremonial armor, much like the Zorathians, though his uniform was adapted to fit his human frame. His mind raced as he looked out at the gathering crowd of Zorathian dignitaries and warriors. They were all watching him, waiting, to see if he would go through with this, and then she entered. Zyra walked down the aisle, her armor gleaming in the light, her posture regal and commanding. Her eyes met Ilias's, and for the first time he saw not just the queen, but the woman beneath the title. The woman who had chosen to fight for peace, the woman who had chosen him. As she reached the altar, Elias took her hand. There was no turning back now. The ceremony began, the words spoken in a language he could barely understand. But it didn't matter. They both knew what this meant. This was their union, their promise to the galaxy. Together, they would end the war. Together, they would build something new. When the ceremony was over, the hall erupted in cheers. The Zorathian people had accepted the union, and with it, the hope of peace. Elias stood beside Zyra, his heart still heavy, but lighter than it had been in days. For the first time in years, he felt as though they were on the brink of something extraordinary, and together they would face whatever came next. Elias stood at the balcony of the royal palace on Zorith, the winds of the planet's highlands swirling around him. Below, the capital city stretched out, a dazzling blend of ancient architecture and futuristic spires. The planet so full of life had been ravaged by war for so long. Now everything felt different, but Elias couldn't quite put his finger on it. Peace was still fragile, and he knew it. Zyra had been by his side since their wedding, working tirelessly to ensure that the agreement between humanity and the Zorathians was solidified. But despite the hopeful words of the ceremony, the reality of their new alliance was far more complex than either of them had anticipated. It had only been a few weeks since their marriage. Already there were signs of resistance from the Zorathian military. General Vornok, the same one who had opposed their union from the beginning, had not disappeared from the picture. He had his own plans, and Elias feared that the general was not alone in his disdain for the peace treaty.
What are
you thinking about? Zyra's voice broke through his thoughts. Elias turned to find her standing behind him, dressed in her ceremonial armor, her face set with determination. I'm thinking about how fragile everything feels, Elias admitted, turning to face her. We've barely begun this new chapter, and yet there are still so many forces working against us. Zyra stepped closer, her expression softening. I know. The war has left scars, both in our people and in our leaders. General Vornok is a powerful man. He believes peace is a weakness, but I don't think he speaks for all of us. Elias nodded, but the doubt still lingered. Do you really think we can make this work? That peace will last? Zyra's gaze hardened, a fire burning in her eyes. I won't let them take this away from us. I won't let my people go back to war. You've already sacrificed so much for this, Elias. We both have. But we can't let fear control us. Not anymore. Words gave him some comfort, but Elias still felt uneasy. They had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. They were allies, but it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about two entire species coming together. And there were many who didn't want that unity. Later that day, they gathered for a meeting with the Zorathian High Command. Generals and diplomats sat around a large table, their faces stern and unreadable. General Vornok was there too, glaring at Elias as though he had become the enemy, not the solution. Zyra stood at the head of the table, her posture strong and commanding. But Elias could feel the tension in her shoulders. We are here, Zyra began, her voice calm yet filled with authority, to finalize the terms of the peace agreement. With the humans, I've already seen the damage caused by this war. The cost has been too high for both sides. It is time to rebuild. Vornok scoffed, his voice low and mocking. Rebuild.
Oh, with humans?
You would have us kneel before them? Queen, you've lost your mind. Elias clenched his fists, but Zyra raised a hand, silencing the room. This is not about kneeling, General. This is about survival. If we do not change our path, the next war could destroy us all. Vornok sneered. Survival. You think that by marrying a human you've secured our future? I don't believe. In peace with the humans, they are weak. They'll betray us the moment they see an opening. Elias stood, his voice cutting through the tension. I've heard enough. Fought alongside your soldiers. Saw the way they fought fiercely. Yes, but for what? More destruction? More death? Peace is the only way forward. Enough. Vornik's voice was a growl. You don't belong here, human. You're a puppet to their queen, nothing more. Zira's voice rang out, sharp and strong. Die. Do not need a puppet, Vornik. I need allies. The days of ruling through fear are over. If you cannot see that, then you have no place in this new future. The room went silent, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Vornik's face was a mixture of fury and disbelief, while the other generals exchanged uncertain glances. Elias could feel the weight of their doubt in the air. It was clear that the path to peace wouldn't be easy, and perhaps not everyone in this room would walk it with them. Finally, Zira broke the silence. We will give you time to reconsider, General, but know this. Those who oppose peace will be dealt with, not by force, but by reason. If you cannot accept this new era, you will be left behind. Vornik stood, his chair scraping across the floor as he pushed it back with a violent motion. You will regret this, he spat, and stormed out of the room. The rest of the generals remained seated, but the atmosphere was heavy with uncertainty. Elias looked at Zira, who gave him a brief nod, signaling that the meeting was over. As they left the high command chamber, Zira's expression was pensive. This is just the beginning, she said quietly. There will be more challenges ahead. Some will resist with everything they have, but we can't give up now. Elias nodded, his own resolve strengthening. He didn't want to fight anymore. He didn't want to see more death. But he would stand by her. He would stand by this new path no matter how difficult it became. Later that evening, Elias and Zira stood together on a balcony overlooking the sprawling city below. The setting sun cast a golden hue over the landscape, and for a brief moment, the world seemed peaceful. Do you think it will work? Elias asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zira didn't hesitate. Yes, I believe in this. I believe in you. Elias turned to her, his heart pounding. He had come to Zoroth as a soldier, but now he had a new purpose. They were more than allies. They were partners, united not just by marriage, but by the shared dream of a better future. We've faced battles. We've faced death, but this. He paused. This is different. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure it works, Zira. She smiled, her hand reaching out to take his. And I will stand by you, Elias. Always. Suddenly, a distant explosion rocked the ground beneath them. The sky seemed to shudder as a plume of smoke rose in the distance. Without a word, Zira's demeanor changed, her face hardening with a new determination. Get to the command. Center, she ordered, her voice sharp and quick. Something's happened. Elias nodded, already running beside her. They moved quickly through the halls of the palace, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they reached the command center, they were met with chaos. News had arrived that a Zorothian warship had been attacked. The blast had come from outside their borders. An intelligence report suggested it was a rogue faction of Zorothian soldiers, led by none other than General Vornik. Zira's eyes narrowed with fury. I knew he wouldn't let this go. Elias stood beside her, his mind racing. They had to act fast. This was the test, the real test of their new alliance. If they couldn't stop this rogue faction, peace would be nothing more than a dream. We need to send a message to all the fleets, Elias said quickly. If we let this go unchecked, it'll be the spark that reignites the war. Zira looked at him, her face resolute. I'll call the council. You get the fleets into position. This ends tonight. As they worked, the weight of the situation became clear. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of the galaxy. The dream of peace would either be realized or shattered in the next few hours. And as Elias looked at Zira, he knew one thing for certain. No matter the cost, they would stand together. They'd come too far to turn back now.